Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People story. What would you do if your neighbor broke into your house and then called 911, claiming you were the one attacking her? That's exactly what my power-hungry HOA president did, and the security camera footage I have is going to blow your mind. Let me back up and explain. 3 years ago, I bought my dream house. It's a modest 3-bedroom ranch on a quiet street with a nice yard and a 2-car garage. The price was right, the location was perfect for my commute, and I fell in love with it immediately. During the closing process, my real estate agent made sure to point out something important. My property was not part of the HOA that governed the rest of the neighborhood. Apparently, when the neighborhood was developed back in the 1970s, my lot and 2 others were part of an older subdivision that predated the HOA. When the developer bought up the surrounding land and built the rest of the neighborhood in the 1980s, they created the HOA for the new properties, but my lot retained its independence. It was all clearly documented in the title search and the deed. I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured it just meant I didn't have to pay HOA fees or follow their rules, which sounded like a bonus to me. I'm a pretty normal guy who keeps his lawn mowed and his house maintained. I wasn't planning on painting my house hot pink or parking a broken down car on the lawn. I just wanted to live my life without someone telling me my mailbox was the wrong shade of black. For the first 18 months, everything was fine. I waved to my neighbors, kept my property neat, and minded my own business. Nobody bothered me about HOA stuff, and I assumed everyone understood the situation. Then Karen became the HOA president. I'm not using her real name, obviously, but Karen fits her so perfectly that it's almost scary. She's in her late 50s, drives a white Lexus SUV, and has that haircut. You know the one. She retired early from some corporate job and apparently decided that running the neighborhood HOA would be her new career. About 2 months after she took over as president, I got my first letter from her. It was delivered to my mailbox in a crisp white envelope with the HOA logo printed on it. The letter informed me that my grass was approaching the maximum allowable height per association covenants, and that I needed to mow within 48 hours to avoid a fine. I was confused because I had just mowed 3 days earlier and my grass looked perfectly normal. I checked the association covenants she referenced, which I'd received from my real estate agent during closing. The maximum grass height was 10 inches. My grass was maybe 3 inches tall. I wrote a polite letter back explaining that my property wasn't part of the HOA and that I wasn't subject to their rules. I included copies of the relevant deed information showing the property boundaries and the fact that my lot predated the HOA. A week later, I got another letter. This one informed me that there was a discrepancy in my property records and that I needed to attend the next HOA meeting to resolve the matter. The letter had a vaguely threatening tone, mentioning potential legal action if I didn't comply. I decided to attend the meeting just to clear things up. It was held in the community center on a Tuesday evening. About 30 people were there, mostly retirees and a few younger couples. Karen sat at the front table with 4 other board members. When it came time for new business, Karen called me up to address the group. I stood up and calmly explained the situation. I showed the deed documents, the property survey, and the title insurance paperwork that clearly showed my property's independence from the HOA. Karen listened with her arms crossed, her lips pressed into a thin line. When I finished, she said, "I understand what these documents say, but the fact remains that your property is physically located within our neighborhood boundaries. You benefit from our property values and our maintenance of common areas. You should be contributing to the association like everyone else." I explained again that legally, I had no obligation to the HOA. My property taxes went to the county for road maintenance and other services. I wasn't using any HOA common areas because there weren't any adjacent to my property. She wasn't having it. "We'll be looking into this further," she said. "I'm sure our attorney will have something to say about these so-called exemptions." Over the next 6 months, I received 17 letters from the HOA. Each one cited a different violation. My grass was too long, my mailbox was the wrong color. I had parked my car on the street overnight, which was apparently forbidden. I had put my trash cans out 12 hours before pickup instead of the allowed 6 hours. I had a small vegetable garden in my backyard that was visible from the street and constituted an unapproved structure. I ignored most of them, but I kept every single letter in a folder just in case. Some of the complaints were so absurd that I actually laughed. One letter claimed that my outdoor thermometer mounted on my porch railing was an unauthorized ornamental fixture. Then the fines started. I received a bill for $1,500 in accumulated fines for various violations. The letter stated that if I didn't pay within 30 days, the HOA would place a lien on my property. That's when I hired a lawyer. His name was Robert Chen, and he specialized in property law and HOA disputes. I showed him all the documentation, and he reviewed everything carefully. After about an hour, he looked up and said, "This is pretty straightforward. You're not part of the HOA. They have zero authority over your property. None. They can't fine you, they can't create a lien, and they can't enforce any of their rules on you." "So what do I do?" I asked. "Write them a cease and desist letter. I'll draft it. If they continue harassing you after that, we can discuss further legal action, but honestly, once they talk to their own attorney, this should stop. Their lawyer will tell them they're wasting everyone's time and money." Robert drafted a detailed cease and desist letter that cited all the relevant case law and clearly explained that any further harassment would result in legal action against both the HOA and Karen personally. We sent it certified mail. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I was working late in my home office one evening around 11 p.m. wearing headphones and deep into debugging some code for a client project. My security system was set to silent alerts on my phone when motion was detected, so I wouldn't be disturbed during work calls. I felt my phone buzz and glanced down to see a motion alert at my back door. I pulled up the camera feed and couldn't believe what I was seeing. Karen was using some kind of pry bar on my back door lock. I immediately muted my headphones and heard the unmistakable sound of someone forcing the door. I grabbed my phone and went to the top of the stairs where I could see down to the kitchen and the back door. The door swung open and Karen stepped inside carrying a bag and her ever-present clipboard. My heart was pounding. I called 911 while watching her from the staircase. I kept my voice quiet as I explained to the dispatcher that someone had just broken into my home and I was upstairs hiding. I described Karen and what she was wearing. The dispatcher told me to stay hidden and stay on the line. Officers were on their way. I watched Karen go through my kitchen drawers and papers on the table. She seemed to be looking for something specific, taking photos of documents with her phone and muttering to herself. Then she headed toward my garage. That's when I heard the sirens approaching. Karen heard them too. She froze, looked around in a panic, and then did something I never could have predicted. She pulled out her own phone and called 911. I could hear her voice from downstairs speaking loudly and clearly into her phone. "Yes, I need police immediately. I'm at my address and the homeowner is threatening me. I'm a neighborhood association representative conducting an authorized inspection and he's being hostile and threatening violence." I stayed on my line with dispatch and told them what she was doing. The dispatcher sounded incredulous but confirmed that they were receiving a second call from the same address. Within a minute, I heard loud knocking and, "Police, open the door." I called down the stairs. "Officers, I'm the homeowner. I'm coming down now. The intruder is in my garage." I came down the stairs slowly with my hands visible and my phone on speaker so dispatch could hear everything. The officers came through the open back door and found Karen in the garage, still on the phone with 911, claiming she was being threatened. When she saw me standing with the officers, her face went through several emotions: shock, anger, and then sudden concern as she apparently tried to look scared of me. One officer asked me to step outside while they talked to Karen. I complied and stood on my back porch while showing the other officer my security camera footage on my phone. The video clearly showed Karen forcing open my back door and entering my house without permission. The officer watched the entire clip, then asked, "And you don't know this woman? She doesn't have permission to be here?" "I know who she is," I said. "She's the HOA president for the neighborhood. But no, she absolutely does not have permission to be in my house. I've never given her permission to enter my property for any reason." The officer went back inside to confer with his partner. I could hear raised voices with Karen insisting she had a legal right to inspect properties in the neighborhood for code violations. After about 10 minutes, both officers came outside with Karen between them. She was in handcuffs. "Sir, we're arresting this woman for breaking and entering," one officer told me. "We'll need you to come down to the station tomorrow to give a formal statement and provide a copy of that video." Karen started yelling at me. "This is harassment! I'm going to sue you! I was conducting official association business. You're going to regret this." The officers put her in the patrol car and drove away. I stood in my driveway, shaking from adrenaline, trying to process what had just happened. The next morning, I called Robert Chen and told him everything. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "She broke into your house?" he finally said. "Yes." "And called 911 on you while she was inside your house that she had just broken into?" "Yes." "And this is all on video?" Yes. Another pause. Okay, this changes things significantly. I'm going to make some calls. That afternoon, I went to the police station and gave my formal statement. I provided copies of all the security camera footage, which showed Karen approaching my house, checking to see if anyone was around, forcing open the back door with a pry bar, and spending nearly 10 minutes going through my belongings before the police arrived. The detective who took my statement asked if I wanted to press charges. I said absolutely yes. Over the next few days, the story spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Apparently, several neighbors had seen Karen being arrested and driven away in a police car. The speculation was rampant until someone leaked what had actually happened. The reaction was mixed. Some neighbors were horrified and apologetic. A few came by to check on me and expressed their disbelief that Karen would do something so extreme. Others, particularly Karen's friends and allies on the HOA board, seemed to think I was somehow at fault for not just cooperating with the HOA in the first place. One neighbor, a retired school teacher named Linda who lived 2 doors down, stopped by with a casserole and an apology. "I voted for Karen to be president," she said sadly. "I thought she'd be organized and get things done. I had no idea she was this obsessed with your property. This is insane." 2 weeks after the break-in, I received a notice that the HOA was suing me. They were claiming that I owed 3 years of back dues plus all the accumulated fines plus legal fees. The total amount was over $15,000. I called Robert immediately. "They're doubling down," he said. "This is incredibly stupid on their part, but it's not entirely surprising. Karen probably convinced the board that they need to push forward to avoid looking weak." "What do I do?" "We defend against it, which will be easy, and we countersue. At this point, you have grounds for harassment, trespassing, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and possibly fraud for trying to collect money they know they have no legal right to collect." He estimated it would start at around $5,000 just for the initial defense, but could go higher if things dragged out with appeals or additional filings. I felt sick about spending that kind of money, but Robert assured me we'd be seeking to recover all attorney fees in the countersuit. Meanwhile, Karen was facing criminal charges for breaking and entering. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had hired an expensive criminal defense attorney and was claiming the whole thing was a misunderstanding. The legal process dragged on for over a year. The original lawsuit about association dues took 8 months to get to court. Karen's personal counterclaim for false imprisonment was added to the same case. My countersuit was filed separately but moved slowly through the system. During this time, I had to take 2 days off work to give depositions. I had to provide detailed documentation of every interaction I'd had with the HOA. I had to sit across a table from Karen and her attorney while they asked me hostile questions about whether I had ever verbally agreed to follow HOA rules, or whether I had ever given Karen permission to enter my property. The answer to both was no, but they tried every angle to suggest otherwise. Finally, we got our court date. The hearing for the HOA's lawsuit against me was scheduled for a Wednesday morning in front of Judge Patricia Martinez. The courtroom was small, just the judge, the 2 attorneys, me, Karen, and 2 other HOA board members who had been subpoenaed to testify. The HOA's attorney went first. He argued that even though my property wasn't technically part of the HOA according to the original deed, I had implicitly accepted their authority by living in the neighborhood and benefiting from the property values they maintained. He claimed that my refusal to pay dues was unjust enrichment. Robert stood up and calmly dismantled every argument. He presented the deed, the title insurance, and the property survey. He showed the original development plans from the 1970s and 1980s. He cited 3 different precedents from state appellate courts that had ruled in similar cases. Then he dropped the hammer. "Your Honor, not only does the plaintiff's HOA have no legal authority over my client's property, but they have engaged in a systematic campaign of harassment against him for over 2 years. This lawsuit is simply the continuation of that harassment. We have documented 17 separate instances of threatening letters, false fines, and demands for payment of money that is not owed. The plaintiff's president, Ms. Karen, last name, even broke into my client's home in what she claimed was an attempt to enforce HOA rules that don't apply to him. She is currently facing criminal charges for that break-in." The judge looked at the HOA's attorney. "Is this true? Your client broke into the defendant's home?" The attorney shifted uncomfortably. "There is a pending criminal matter, yes, Your Honor, but that's separate from—" "It's not separate," the judge interrupted. "It's directly relevant to the question of whether this lawsuit is being pursued in good faith or as continued harassment." She reviewed the documents for several minutes, then looked up. The HOA's claim is dismissed with prejudice. The defendant's property is clearly not part of the homeowners association. The HOA has no authority to assess dues or fines against this property. Furthermore, I'm awarding attorney fees to the defendant for having to defend against this frivolous lawsuit. Karen's face went white. One of the board members next to her put his head in his hands, but we weren't done yet. 2 months later, my countersuit went forward in the same courtroom. This time, I was the plaintiff, suing both the HOA and Karen personally for harassment, trespassing, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and fraud. We presented all the evidence, every threatening letter, every false fine, the cease and desist letter they had ignored, and most importantly, the security camera footage of Karen breaking into my house. Robert called me to the stand, and I testified about the constant stress of dealing with the HOA's demands. I explained how I had felt violated and unsafe in my own home after the break-in. I described the anxiety of wondering if Karen would try something else, and the financial burden of having to install additional security measures and hire an attorney. The HOA's attorney tried to argue that Karen had been acting independently and that the HOA board shouldn't be held responsible for her individual actions. But Robert countered with email records we'd subpoenaed that showed Karen had kept the board informed of her efforts to bring the non-compliant property into the fold. Several board members had even encouraged her actions in writing. Judge Martinez didn't look pleased as she read through the emails. When it came time for her ruling, she was blunt. This is one of the most egregious cases of HOA overreach I've seen in my 15 years on the bench. The defendants knew, or should have known, that they had no legal authority over the plaintiff's property. They continued to harass him anyway. Miss Karen's last name's decision to break into his home crosses the line from civil harassment into criminal behavior. The HOA board's decision to file a lawsuit they knew had no merit demonstrates a pattern of bad faith. She ruled in my favor on every count. Karen was ordered to pay me significant damages, including all my attorney fees, compensation for emotional distress, and punitive damages for fraud. The total came to just over $22,000, which included my actual attorney fees of about $8,000, compensation for emotional distress, and punitive damages. The HOA itself was ordered to pay an additional $10,000 in punitive damages and was formally barred from any future contact with me or my property. Karen appealed, which surprised no one. But 6 months later, the appeals court upheld the judgment and added more attorney fees for the frivolous appeal. Meanwhile, her criminal case had proceeded separately. She ended up pleading guilty to a reduced charge of criminal trespass to avoid jail time. She got 2 years of probation, community service, and a permanent criminal record. The HOA board voted her out as president in an emergency meeting about 2 weeks after the criminal judgment. She moved out of the neighborhood 3 months after that. I heard through Linda that Karen and her husband sold their house at a loss because they wanted to get out quickly. She also reportedly had trouble in the neighborhood after everyone learned what she'd done. The criminal conviction was public record, and word spread quickly through local social media groups. I thought that would be the end of it. I had my judgment, Karen was gone, and I could finally live in peace. But then I received a certified letter from the Neighborhood Association's new board. They were trying to distance themselves from Karen's behavior and rebuild their reputation. The letter explained that while they understood my property wasn't under their jurisdiction, they were requesting as a courtesy to the community that I maintain my property according to their published standards. They emphasized this was purely voluntary and they respected my independence. The letter concluded, "We simply ask that you follow the same community standards as everyone else to maintain neighborhood harmony and property values." I read that line over and over. Follow the same community standards as everyone else. I decided I would do exactly that. I pulled out the association's covenant documents and read them carefully. There was an interesting section about property modifications and improvements. It stated that any homeowner planning exterior modifications should submit plans to the Architectural Review Committee for approval before beginning work. Since they asked me to follow the same community standards as everyone else, I decided to comply. I drafted up plans for several home improvement projects I'd been considering, repainting my house, adding a deck, installing a fence, and building a small shed. I submitted all of them to the Architectural Review Committee with a detailed letter explaining that I wanted to be a good neighbor and follow their process voluntarily. The new board was thrilled. Finally, after years of conflict, I was coming around and participating in the community process. They scheduled a special meeting to review my plans. I attended the meeting with Robert, which confused them, but they proceeded anyway. They approved my paint color choices, my deck design, and my fence plans with minor modifications. Everything was going smoothly until we got to the shed. The architectural committee had some concerns about the shed's placement and asked if I could move it 15 feet to the east to be more in line with other properties' outbuildings. This is where the compliance became malicious. I explained that I had submitted these plans voluntarily as a courtesy, following their request to follow the same community standards. However, since my property wasn't actually under their jurisdiction, I had just learned something interesting from my attorney. By participating in their review process and accepting their modifications, I might be inadvertently creating a legal precedent that could bind my property to their covenant. Robert backed me up, explaining that voluntary submission to an HOA architectural review process, followed by compliance with their modifications, could potentially be used to argue in the future that I had accepted their authority over my property. I told them I had 3 options. Option 1, withdraw all my applications and build everything without their approval, as was my legal right, following only county codes. Option 2, accept all their modifications, including moving the shed, but have them sign a legal document explicitly stating that my voluntary participation would not create any precedent or authority over my property, now or in the future. Option 3, they could approve my shed exactly as I proposed, respecting my property independence while I voluntarily followed their process. The room went silent. The new HOA president, a nice guy named Tom, who had always been friendly to me, looked genuinely distressed. "We just wanted to have a good relationship with you," he said. "We weren't trying to trick you into anything." "I believe you," I said, "but I also can't take that risk. I've already spent years and thousands of dollars defending my property rights. I need to protect them going forward." They asked for a week to discuss it with their attorney. Their attorney apparently told them the same thing Robert had told me. My voluntary submission to their process was creating a complicated legal situation. If I followed their modifications and they later tried to enforce rules on me, I could argue they had tricked me into accepting their authority through the architectural review process. But if I claimed they had authority and then changed my mind, they might actually gain some jurisdiction they didn't currently have. It was a legal mess that nobody wanted. The board came back with a 4th option. They asked me to withdraw my applications entirely. They didn't want to risk any future legal confusion about jurisdiction over my property. The legal drama with Karen had cost them too much money already, and they had no appetite for more potential litigation. I agreed, withdrew all my applications, and proceeded to build everything exactly as I had originally planned, following only county codes. The irony was perfect. They had asked me to follow the same community standards as everyone else. When I tried to do exactly that, they realized that me following their standards could actually give them authority over my property that they didn't want to risk claiming. So they asked me to stop following their standards. I had maliciously complied with their request by taking it so literally that it backfired completely. I built my deck, painted my house, installed my fence, and constructed my shed, all without their input or approval, which is exactly what I would have done anyway. But now I had documented proof that they had explicitly asked me to withdraw my voluntary applications specifically to avoid creating any jurisdictional confusion. If they ever tried to claim authority over my property again, I had a letter from their board asking me to withdraw from their architectural review process. It was beautiful. The new board and I actually have a decent relationship now. Tom waves when he drives by, and Linda still brings me casseroles sometimes. We don't talk about the HOA, and they don't send me letters. I still see some of Karen's old allies around the neighborhood occasionally. They don't make eye contact. My house is probably the nicest one on the street now, if I do say so myself. The deck turned out great, the new fence gives me privacy, and the shed is exactly where I wanted it. Everything was built to code and looks sharp, and I've never paid a single dollar to the HOA. Sometimes I think about that night when Karen broke into my house and then had the audacity to call 911 on me while standing in my kitchen. The sheer entitlement of it still amazes me. She was so convinced that she had authority over my property that she thought she could break in, conduct an inspection, and then claim I was the one in the wrong. The security camera footage is still saved on my computer. Every once in a while, when I'm feeling petty, I watch it again and shake my head at the absurdity of the whole situation. I won. Karen lost. The HOA learned a very expensive lesson about property rights in picking their battles. And I get to live in my house, on my property, following only the laws that actually apply to me without anyone telling me my grass is a quarter-inch too long or my mailbox is the wrong shade of black. It's everything I wanted when I bought the place 3 years ago. The next one is a malicious compliance story. This happened a few years ago when I worked at McDonald's. The one I worked in was near a bunch of schools, so most of the staff was high school kids. As summer vacation started, we began having the trouble of an employee getting break and then spending their break eating their meal and conversating with their friends who were still working in the kitchen. It was having a seriously bad effect on productivity as well as posing quite a few health risks, so our manager finally initiated a rule that if you were on your break, you couldn't leave the break room until your break was over. This went swimmingly until the kids went back to school. We then had a new problem. Short staffing during break cycles meant our ticket times would skyrocket during rushes. Management lifted the rule so that employees on break could clock in early and help out with the rush, however. The district manager didn't like the implications of employees working shortened or no break shifts and forcefully reinstated the rule. They also doubled down by saying that employees who tried to work during their scheduled break would be written up and/or terminated for doing so. QMC. The date was 4:20 a day when nobody wants to be working at any fast food place, much less McDonald's. We had been getting slammed so hard from the open of the store that we called in extra help from other stores, including the regional and district managers. As the break cycle began, the management was pleased with the sub-2-minute ticket times they had managed to maintain. A few breaks through and we were managing well. Then came my break. As soon as I sat down to eat, someone came into the store and ordered 47 double quarter pounders. This was right after the Fresh Initiative where all quarter pounders were made fresh, so this was already a minor panic. Immediately after that order, someone in the drive-thru ordered 75 20-piece nugget meal. The amount of panic in the kitchen was palpable. I was comfortably lounging in a chair browsing my phone and enjoying my meal while the kitchen struggled to keep up with the orders. As ticket times began to soar, the management did exactly as I expected. District manager came into the break room and demanded me to end my break early and help in the kitchen. My response was very simply, "I'm sorry, but according to the rules you made, I can be written up or terminated for completing your request." I then continued browsing my phone, trying to enjoy the last 10 minutes of my break. The regional manager entered the room and said that he would personally terminate me if I didn't do the thing that I wasn't supposed to do. The other employee who was on break with me immediately rose and clocked in despite still having 10 minutes left on her break. She was written up for breaking the rule after the shift was over, so I felt good sitting in my chair and continuing to ignore them. In the aftermath, the people who made the giant orders took what was made after half an hour and left with refunds for the unmade food, nearly $150 each. Customers who were waiting for smaller orders were compensated with gift cards for their patience, yet many walked out without even getting their orders. We paid out nearly $1,500 in gift cards. Because customers were walking out on orders without collecting them, we had nearly $5,000 in food waste that night. All of the closers went home with nearly 2 bundle boxes of burgers, fries, and nuggets. Regional and district manager were moved to a different region. The rule was edited to say that you were able to clock back in early at the manager's discretion in the event of a rush. Because I was the only employee who held his ground against the regional and district managers during the rush, I was rewarded with free meals and drinks until I moved away from my hometown and couldn't eat at that McDonald's anymore. Although when I come to visit friends, I occasionally get rung up a manager discount by the few employees who still remember me. The next one is an entitled people story. Last night, my girlfriend and I went out to eat at a popular dive bar. This bar is popular for both its amazing fried chicken and their thriving raccoon population. Because my girlfriend recently shattered her foot, she hasn't been able to get out much, and I thought this would be the perfect date to cheer her up. One side of the establishment has enormous bay windows through which you can watch the raccoons enjoy table scraps as you eat. As this is a dive bar, there are no reservations. You can't choose where you sit. Thus, seating next to the window is highly coveted. In all the years I've been going there, I've had the privilege of sitting up next to the window maybe twice. You can usually expect some people to peer over your shoulder or snap a quick photo of the raccoons while you're eating, but most people are respectful about it. Keyword, most. Last night, the bar was overrun with children. It's also late summer, which means the baby raccoons are out in full swing. The two of us were seated right next to the window, with my back parallel to the window and hers facing the corner. At first, we had a great time cooing at the little raccoons tearing into their early evening snacks. Then the children came. Our table was flanked by 3 families, all with children under the age of 10. The first few times a kid got all up in my space, I cut their parents some slack. Children get excited about baby animals, and they're still learning boundaries, their parents just want a peaceful night out, etc. Thankfully, 2 of the families corrected their kids and steered them away from our space. The largest family of the bunch, however, did not. I crap you not, before we even got our food, these kids started banging on the window with their fists. The kind of banging that would scare fish at an aquarium. Right next to my ear, naturally. I'm thinking that a kid big enough to be in 3rd grade should know better, and his little brother should too, but they pay me no mind. It's like I'm an NPC, vaguely in their way, while they embark on their quest to frighten as many unassuming animals as possible. Their parents are watching, disinterested, but they don't intervene. My girlfriend, being the sweetheart that she is, sees my uncomfortable face and asks if I want to switch spots. She reasons she's more comfortable with kids being in her space than I am. Once the last kid is returned to his table, we switch places. To everyone watching us switch, it's obvious she's in a cast. I make sure to put her crutches on her side of the table. I think to myself, surely they won't get all up in her space when that would risk knocking over her crutches. Surely, their parents wouldn't allow it. When I glance over at the family a few minutes later, the middle child is staring at us. Entitled Dad is holding the pouty preschooler on his lap. The oldest boy is knee-deep in his fried chicken. I mistakenly thought that the worst was over. No, it was not. We're hardly 15 minutes into our dinner when I look behind my girlfriend and notice the older 2 boys standing directly behind her. They're fiddling with her crutches, peeking through them, touching the handlebars and screws. My jaw dropped. I made direct eye contact with their mother, who seemed to be staring straight through me, and then with the young parent sitting behind my girlfriend, who seemed just as shocked as I was. Their toddler was more well-behaved. My girlfriend turned to the kids. "Hey, can you please not touch those? These are medical aids, and I need them to walk. My foot is broken." They gave her a blank stare. They didn't react with shame. They didn't even stop touching them. The younger one went, "Oh, crutches?" as he pulled on the rubber handle, and the older one said nothing. My girlfriend said, gently but firmly, "Yes, they are crutches, and I need them. Can you please stop touching them?" They stared for a couple more seconds before wandering back to their seats. I glanced over at the family a few minutes later and saw entitled Mom glaring at us like she wanted to shoot lasers out of her eyes. My girlfriend turned around to confirm, and Mom glared at her too. At that point, the mood was ruined. We left shortly after that, but they made sure to leave faster. Not a single apology or even an ounce of guilt. Just pure, unbridled entitlement. Anyway, thank you for watching.